It is Tuesday, January 14th, 2025, and we are here to discuss the North Idaho SAUSA update. And I will turn that over to Ben.
Sounds good. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll actually do very little talking today. My hope is to turn it over to these fine gentlemen to essentially bring you guys up to speed on what's been happening over the last roughly year and a half. Going back through my notes, it looked like our last full update on this position was November of 23. So we've been a long time in the works on this. There's been a lot of moving parts behind the scenes, but I'm excited that all the pieces to the puzzle appear to finally be coming together. And I think we're in a position to see this thing move forward. So by way of introduction, we have Mr. Luke Malik. He's served and worked with the Governor's Esto Perpetua Task Force, which for those that maybe aren't familiar or weren't aware, that's the Governor's Task Force that was designed to address drug trafficking and fentanyl in particular. And then we have two members with us from the U.S. Attorney's Office. We have the U.S. Attorney for the District of Idaho, Mr. Joshua Hurwitz, and with him is Justin Walcott. So, gentlemen.
Great, thanks. It's all right. I'll
go ahead.
Kind of give an overview, and I'm sorry if this is redundant, but I just kind of want to give a little bit of background on kind of what the SAUSA is and then why we think it would be a good fit for up here. So SAUSA stands for Special Assistant United States Attorney, and that's different than Assistant United States Attorney because it has the word special on it, meaning it's a partnership, and that's really what we're here to tout today and the benefits of that partnership. So there's several SAUSA positions in the state of Idaho. There has never been one in the northern part of the state. In the other part of the state, they're extremely effective because they're able to take the burden of prosecuting people that a lot of them not from the state and taking that off of the taxpayers in the locality. So the way we envision this having an impact up here is you have the interstate that's right next to us here, and there's a lot of problems that are coming across our border from Washington or from Montana headed to Washington, and they are bringing really toxic things through the area. So whether that's the drugs themselves or the related crimes that come with the drugs. So we view this obviously as the deterrent effect that it's going to have. Because knowing that there's somebody up here specifically to go after this type of criminal behavior, namely fentanyl and methamphetamine, and then the related crimes that follow those, I think that right there is a huge benefit to the northern part of the state, particularly Shoshone County. The other benefits that we see is that you have these people that again have no ties here, but they're bringing this stuff here. So when you arrest somebody here, it becomes a local case. It means the cost of incarcerating that person while they're waiting, doing all the investigation, doing all of the prosecution, and then dealing with the aftermath of that. That all lands on the local taxpayers, and these people have no ties here, right? So you have the administrative burden on the prosecutor's office, you have the administrative burden on the clerk's office, and then you have all the direct costs that go along with that. We're able to offload a tremendous amount of that to the federal government by having the ability of this prosecutor to federally prosecute these crimes. And I'll let my colleagues here talk a little bit more about that. But that's, that alone, taking the administrative and actual cost burden off of Shoshone County, I think is a tremendous benefit. The other thing that I want to touch on is that we're really grateful to Shoshone County for helping us take this conversation that far. Your prosecutor has been a tremendous asset in this conversation because he has been able to pull together people that, I remember when I was in the legislature in probably 2015, I was sitting in the Joint Finance Appropriations Committee. We were talking about trying to get a partnership together, and there was just no ability to do that. And he has been able to take the lead on this, and so the fact that we can have this person housed in the U.S. Attorney's Office, but as an employee of Shoshone County, is a huge step up in making this happen, and that's a lot of that's due to his leadership, and then the communication that he's had with not only you but municipalities throughout northern Idaho. That's been a really tremendous benefit to moving this forward. So I want to say thank you to him, but also to you guys for being willing to entertain the conversation. And so the event that is changed from the conversations that we've had about both out in the community, it sounds like since your last update, is that the governor's office has, the governor made an announcement actually in his State of the State speech on January 6th that the governor's budget was including money for this position. So that's another $70,000 a year that we'll be able to put towards this effort, which really kind of was the last piece that we needed. And I assume that because it's been so long since we've had a conversation, it's probably gonna have to go around and solidify the partnership a little bit more, but the lion's share of the work has already been done. We were waiting for that last piece to fall into place, and so this is that alone is a pretty big update. The fact that the governor's office, after months and months and months of conversations, has not only committed to that, but committed to it in front of the entire state. And for this position that your prosecutor's been working on and is going to be housed by your county, which again, huge feather in all of your caps, but particularly in the prosecutors, and we're all proud to be a part of it. These guys can't make the sales pitch quite the way that I can because they have rules they have to follow, but I can tell you I'm a huge advocate for this. So I've seen it work in other parts of the state. I've seen it really take a tremendous burden off of the areas that have these, and it, again, talk about the deterrent effect. Letting the criminal element know that we're taking this seriously enough to put a specific person, like my entire job is to put drug dealers in jail. That's a pretty big deal.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'll just add that, as Luke said, we wouldn't be here today without your openness to this creative solution and to your prosecutor's tenacity and creativeness in bringing us all together. So, like Luke also said, we can't advocate for how you spend the tax dollars of your county, but we're here to answer questions. I can just give you a little bit of background on the model that we already have for this position and how we would anticipate it working into the future. So I'm Josh Sherwood. I'm the U.S. Attorney. Justin is what's called the first assistant, so essentially my chief deputy role. As we're in the middle of the transition between administrations, I most likely will be asked to resign in the coming days or weeks, and Justin would step in to be what's called the acting U.S. Attorney. And so it's really important for both of us to be here together to show you that the openness of our office to this program is not going to change one bit, even if the leader of the office is different. So let me just sort of step back from that and tell you a little bit about the existing SAUSA programs that we have across the state. I'll try to be brief and answer your questions. We have, as Luke mentioned, one of these positions in the Treasure Valley that's been in existence since 2006. Justin actually, like many of our prosecutors in the office, held that position for a period of time, focused on down in the Treasure Valley gang violence. In 2016, a partnership arose in eastern Idaho to replicate that model, and that prosecutor there has been really focused on drug trafficking with the corridors up through really Utah, coming into eastern Idaho, and done amazing work. And again, as Luke mentioned, there's been a gap in North Idaho in terms of not having a SAUSA program here. So from our perspective, we are excited to be able to provide that if that's what the commission and its partners decide. One, I think, in addition to the benefits that Luke mentioned, one of the added benefits in terms of the funding for this particular position is that there's federal dollars that have been committed through a grant program, which we can talk about. That's about $50,000 a year. The governor has allotted $70,000 a year, and that leaves about $15,000 estimated to come from the counties and cities that are participating, which I think is a lower amount than we see in our other programs. But again, the benefits in our estimation in those programs in the Treasure Valley and Eastern Idaho. If you look at the cost of incarcerating the people that we do through these programs, it's millions of dollars, about $2.5 million every year, based on about 20, 25, 30 defendants who are removed from your communities, and the cost of prosecution is borne by the federal government at that point, and of course their incarceration is going to be out of state and borne by the federal government during incarceration and rehabilitation, and then even supervision when they are released back into whatever community they decide to go to. So it's a really long-standing benefit, both from the immediate hit and benefit to public safety, but also a long-term solution to addressing some of the underlying criminality that led to the conduct in the first place. And then, of course, with fentanyl, which is really the impetus for the conversations in the first place, we're talking about a global and hemispheric problem with the precursor chemicals coming to Mexico, the cartels making these illicit fentanyl pills, and through highways and other means, those drugs coming into Idaho and North Idaho, not because of really not just individual drug dealers in your communities, but people coming in trying to create a market or trying to pass through to places like Montana. So I think we've said this really well. It's a problem that's landed in your community, but it's not your problem, if that makes sense. And so this is, again, with Ben's support, a really great way to provide a resource to this region, and have the costs borne by where they should be borne, which is at the federal level. So with that, Justin, unless you'd like to add anything, again, thank you for having us. We're happy to answer your questions, and we're really grateful to Luke, the governor's operation as a perpetual, and then of course your prosecuting Ben's hard and long-standing work on this, and your gratitude for having an open mind about it. Really appreciate it.
The only thing that I will add, Josh mentioned that I started my career as a SAUSA. I was the second gang SAUSA starting in 2009. And what I recognized very early on was this program provides such a significant benefit to the state by taking people out of our state that have come into our state to do our citizens harm. And we've had that success in the Treasure Valley, and we've had that success in Eastern Idaho. Like Josh said, we are kind of prohibited from advocating for this, right? But I can just tell you that the idea of a SAUSA position in North Idaho is something that's very personal to me and has been for a long time, recognizing that there's this gap, that we have it in the Treasure Valley, we have it in Eastern Idaho, we do not have it in Northern Idaho. And it's personal to me because I'm from North Idaho. I grew up in Post Falls. I went to the U of I for undergrad and law school, and my family history is right here in Shoshone County. So the idea that we would be able to have this position to benefit the people of North Idaho is, again, very significantly personal to me. And I think that, the good that can be done within this program for the state and for the people of this state, and to take that burden off of the locals, when it's really not their burden to bear, because it's not your people that are doing this. It's people from outside of your county. It's people from outside of our state. And frankly, it's people from outside of our country. That's where these drugs are coming from. So to place that financial burden where it belongs, which is on the federal government to address this problem, which is what we do in our office, every day in prosecuting these cases, I think does a lot of good for the state of Idaho and certainly for the people of North Idaho and the people of Shoshone County. So I'm very excited about it. I'm very thankful that this is something that you're considering, and I really can't give enough kudos to Ben for his efforts on this. It's been well over a year of him really being the person that's kind of out there sounding this alarm, saying we need this, and that's kind of what is required for our office to come to the table. So thank you so much.
We were talking earlier about how the legislature was in town prior to it was in November, so it was during the North Idaho tour is what it's called. So it's right after everybody's elected to the legislature. So Josh and I were able to have a slot there to talk about fentanyl, and I'm glad he brought that up because we kind of glossed over that. But fentanyl is such an invasive aspect of this, and then like you said, it's coming from China, it's coming from Mexico, it's coming from Washington, and headed to Montana, and it's something I said to the legislature when we had our chance in front of them was that you cannot care about the sanctity of life and not care about fentanyl because it is such a killer. So it's not only the criminal element that's coming here, it's the fact that it's killing people once it gets here, and going to other places in the country through this corridor to kill people. I mean, it is absolutely deadly and having a tremendous devastating impact on our communities. So I think I think that's something to keep in mind as you're considering this and the impact that this position will be able to have. It will save lives. So with that, I think we're happy to answer any questions, as these gentlemen have said, but we would ask that I think there's 2 MOUs that you have available to look at, and we would ask for your consideration on those and the authority that's needed for the clerk and you to move forward on this, right? Is that
yeah, so it'll be the BOCC chair, I think, that's designated on the signature for one of the MOUs, and then myself as the supervising attorney for the host agency.
Okay.
And then obviously the clerk will need to be looped in once it comes time to hire, which we're a ways out from that.
Yeah.
But that will be the next step as far as our obligations are concerned. I can maybe fill in just a couple of additional pieces that I anticipate may be questions of the BOCC or the community in general from having essentially been out on the road, pitching this and speaking with community members both here in Shoshone and elsewhere in the 1st District. One of the first questions, and I'm going to hit this head on because I don't want it to come out in a negative light. This question was posed at a number of different community engagements, and that is, how many cases are we talking about? We've heard that question. We're not scared to hit it head on. We'll address it. The workload of a federal prosecutor is significantly less than what our city prosecutors or county prosecutors are used to handling, and it's just the nature of their position. We anticipate that this position will prosecute roughly 30 or so cases a year from the estimates we have in those other jurisdictions. And so that'll be 30 cases a year. That'll be additional cases that are handled by the U.S. Attorney's Office here in the 1st District that aren't otherwise being handled already. When you talk about, well, where are those cases going to be coming from? Well, they'll be coming from the jurisdictions of any of the partner agencies. And so Shoshone County will be one of about a dozen different partner agencies. So we'll all be sharing in that. We'll also be sharing in the local partnership cost. And so one of the MOUs has got a little algorithm in there where we look at population base as kind of our reflective metric for saying what's the likelihood that a case is going to come out of this jurisdiction that'll be handled by this prosecutor. And then the cost proportionate share is built off of that model. And so if we look at the caseload for Shoshone County, say out of those 30 cases, if there are 3 or 4 or 5 cases that come off of our county workload and go to the feds, that's 3 or 4 or 5 cases that our clerk doesn't have to worry about administratively handling, that our prosecutor's office doesn't have to prosecute. And most importantly, I would say, is that our local detention costs don't have to bear the burden of. And that detention cost extends beyond our local incarceration. Obviously, we recognize that we're all county taxpayers, we're all state taxpayers, and we're all federal taxpayers. But the further down the line we can shift that burden, the more diluted the cost becomes. So local incarceration, while somebody's being held here in Shoshone County, that's directly on us as a county cost. If we were to prosecute that case and that person were to get, say, a 10-year prison sentence through IDOC as part of a county prosecution, then as state taxpayers, we're now going to pay for that cost for 10 years of prison. Whereas if that case can be shifted federally, the first 6 months of local incarceration off our backs, and then the 10 years of state incarceration also off our backs, and it gets diluted down to the federal taxpayers. And I think that that's the significant cost benefit. If we look at the various benefits, that's probably the most significant one. So the amount of cases handled being a question that came up, I wanted to address it. hit that head on and let you know that essentially any amount of cases I think is going to be a benefit to our taxpayers. The second piece that I think is important to discuss is that the geographically identified area is based on trafficking corridors. So it's going to run I-90, Washington to Montana. So that strip that runs through Shoshone and Cooney County. And then it's going to be US 95 from Lewiston up until it hits 90 and then goes east and west. And so that's going to incorporate, Lewis or Nez Perce County and Lewiston, Latah County and Moscow and on up. And so those were the entities, both city and county, that were asked to be a part of the local partnership. So there's outliers, up Sandpoint, let's use as an example that although it's got a big population base, it didn't meet that metric, so they haven't been invited to be a part of the partnership initially. But I think that our geographically identified corridors is a really good starting point for us, and it'll give us an opportunity to, run this position for a few years and see what kind of effect and benefit it has. And I think that Shoshone County being asked to serve as the host agency, although in other jurisdictions that host agency sometimes is asked to take on an administrative burden, the way this one is structured, we have our administrative cost already built into it. And so I think that any, argument that, well, it's nice that we got asked to be the host agency, but now we also have more work to do. There's going to be a little more work to do, but we're also going to be receiving funding for that work. And so I think that will also be a net benefit to the county. So.
I have a question. Now, you guys came, I went to a meeting before with you, we talked about this, and the difference between, what was really amazing to me was the difference between Idaho's laws and federal laws on drugs, and where, I think they talked about last time where there is no bail. And if you kind of elaborate on that, just kind of show the public what the federal laws are and what it means, because they're gonna be out of our area and in federal custody, and they won't have a chance to come back.
So Mr. Chair, maybe I'll let Justin dig a little deeper. He's been supervisor in our criminal division for the last 5 years, so has day-to-day duties with that particular issue. But at the highest levels, we have the ability to obtain detention for drug traffickers. There's a presumption that they should be detained in federal custody. And then not only do you have that stronger, sometimes hammer, I suppose, but on the back end, the federal supervision. So there is no parole, which I think you, Chair, alluded to. So the person will serve the whole sentence minus some good time credit if they behave themselves while in custody. But then there's more supervision on the back end, which is akin to probation. It doesn't replace the prison time, but it's added on to the back end. And again, that's going to be a burden on the federal government to take care of that. So Justin, anything else you want to add?
Yeah, Josh certainly hit the highlights, but I'll tell you, I was a state prosecutor for about a decade before I came to the U.S. Attorney's Office, and there's a fairly big contrast between state and federal sentences. We have what are called sentencing guidelines, which means 95% of our federal defendants actually go to prison. Now some of that has to do with the types of cases we take, right? I mean, we don't take user amount. We don't prosecute drug possession. We prosecute traffickers. But the reality is, in federal court, we are seeing much more significant sentences because of our sentencing guidelines and because they're generally a little more serious cases. And, the things that Josh highlighted, really important. Our detention statute is you are either detained and you are in custody, or you are released on supervision. And as he mentioned, for our serious drug trafficking offenses, there is a presumption that they will be detained. And a lot of times what we see with these drug trafficking cases is this is not the first time, right? We see repeat offenders in our drug trafficking cases, and those are usually defendants that are detained. So that's certainly a big benefit. They are not in the community while they're awaiting their trial or their sentencing. And then, receiving a more significant sentence, a sentence that is going to be served in the Federal Bureau of Prisons, not the Idaho Department of Corrections. We do not have a Federal Bureau of Prisons facility in Idaho, thank God. Those defendants are sent to Louisiana or Ohio or Florida or California to serve in a federal sentence, which frankly is a huge benefit when we're talking about anybody that has local ties to drug trafficking organizations or gangs. We want to break that up. Frankly, we've had a lot of cases where people, even serving time in IDOC, continue to communicate with their co-conspirators, their fellow drug members, their drug conspirators, their fellow gang members. That's a much more difficult thing to do when you're across the country. So that's a large benefit. And then, as Josh mentioned, we don't have parole. So, when you get a state sentence, when I was a state prosecutor, I might get a 10-year sentence, but that might be 3 years fixed and 7 years indeterminate, which a lot of times meant they were going to do their 3 years and then they were going to be out on parole. When someone receives a 10-year federal sentence, they serve a 10-year federal sentence. We don't have fixed and indeterminate time. They get about 50 days a year good time if they keep their nose clean. So it doesn't reduce their sentence very significantly. And then on the back end, we have what's called supervised release. So it's almost like a period of probation that they serve after their release to help them reintegrate into society. If they don't follow their terms of supervised release after they've served their prison sentence, they go back to prison. They serve an additional period of incarceration. So, the benefits of federal prosecution when you're dealing with the people that are committing these really significant felony crimes is there is much more of a punishment aspect to it. There's definitely much more of a removal from your community aspect to it. And I think the benefits of that when you're dealing with drug traffickers, especially drug traffickers coming from out of county, out of state, out of country, are fairly significant.
Anybody else have any questions?
I was just going to ask, and maybe Ben, you're the one to ask. So I was rereading these memorandums of understanding. The last one I have is dated August 1st. Is that the current one?
That's the current one. I did update the date to January 1, and I made some very slight revisions to points of contact and things like that have changed since we started.
Okay.
But substantively, it will be the same MOU that I've got for the BOCC.
Thank you.
Oh, and also the proposed or contemplated state funding. Originally it was at 70, but the most recent request that we've asked the governor to put in was 75. So we actually bumped that up a tad.
Okay. And how much did he approve?
So his budget is approved by the legislature. And so I think it goes before JFAC. So JFAC's going to have essentially the say in whether or not they're willing to put their stamp on his request. But we've gotten, I would say, fairly good indications that will be a priority to ensure approval for. So.
If I could add one thing just on the funding, and I don't think we mentioned this, our other two SAUSA programs, the Gang SAUSA and the Eastern Idaho Partnership SAUSA, also are partially funded by the state through the governor's budget. I think it's run through ISP, but it's through part of the governor's budget.
Okay.
IDOC.
Or maybe IDOC. Yeah, IDOC.
Yeah.
That's right.
And again, if I could, Mr. Chair, chime in too. Again, not trying to sell anything necessarily, but a unique feature, I'll say, of this program is that because we've brought federal grant funding to the table, the proportion that the local partnership is contributing is smaller than in the other partnerships. So I think that's fair to point out and just important for all of us to understand.
And at one time, we discussed where if all the partners that we thought were going to be around would be about $2,000 a pop. Is that?
Yeah, I think most partners, and that metric is on, I think it's maybe Exhibit B on the local partnership MOU. So it uses a 3-part multiplier. So if you've got a population between 0 and 5,000, you're a 1x multiplier. So those would be our small cities. If you're between 5 and 15,000, you're a 2x multiplier, and then 15,000 above is a 3x multiplier. And so we essentially take however many local partners we're going to have, we add them all up, we divide it by the total number that is remaining after we take in the governor's contribution, we take in the HIDA contribution, we say what's left, And we're estimating that number to be at about 15,000,
Mhm.
but it's also going to depend on the benefits the employee receives, right? So
Yep.
part of that will be the clerk for the county punching it into the county's metric for benefits computation, and then saying, all right, if this person, is single or married, or they're
Mhm.
taking advantage of this, health insurance benefit, etc., this is the final number. So we'll start with that final number. We'll work backwards by subtracting the outside contributions, which will make up about 90%
Mhm.
of the total cost of that employee. And that'll only leave about 10% left for the local partners to split.
Yeah.
So that 10% will be split by about a dozen or so partners.
Yeah.
And those partners will share a proportionate amount based on population.
Yeah, then that 15,000 is basically what's left over, right? And
Correct.
that's going to be shared between all the partners. So, okay. You have any questions, Commissioner?
No.
No. Well, I'm pretty excited about it. I kind of followed this from our last meeting, and I think it's a point in the right direction for sure, especially with our I-90. They call it the gauntlet.
Well, would you entertain a motion?
Yeah, I'll entertain a motion.
I would move that we affirm and agree with the memorandum of understanding for the North Idaho Special Assistant U.S. Attorney as updated January 1st. Is that the date on the new one?
Mm-hmm. And that's one of the two MOUs. There's two MOUs. One's a local partnership one, and the other one will be the U.S. Attorney's Office MOU. So both of those will require OCC approval.
You want to just do one at a time? Would that be fine?
Yeah.
Okay, that'd be second that.
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, motion carries.
Okay, this is the second one that we need to approve, correct?
Yes, sir.
I'm doing the right thing. Well, then I'll make a motion that we also affirm and approve this memorandum of understanding between the U.S. Attorney's Office and for the District of Idaho and the Prosecuting Attorney's Office as the host agency for the North Idaho SAUSA initiative.
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, motion carries. All right, we're ready to go.
Sounds like a
Thank
round
you
of
so
applause.
much.
A lot of work.
Thank you, guys.
For you.
This is going to be a big help for our community.
Well, thank you. And if I may, Mr. Chair, we hope so. We expect it will be. And we can't thank you enough for the patience and tenacity and creativeness of Mr. Allen here and all of you for sticking with this during a lengthy process. I think the dividends will, if the other partnerships are in a model, will be paying your county and your community and your region dividends for decades to come. So we're very grateful to be a part of it.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks for
Mr.
taking the time
Prosecutor.
to come up.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's our pleasure. We love it up here. So.
Yeah.
I'm a season pass holder at Lookout, so I'm driving.
Good time to get skiing this afternoon.
Good to see a fellow U of I guy.
Oh, you bet.
Yeah.
We'll adjourn the meeting?